I'm gonna make this episode intro 1 minute or less because I've noticed that when I listen to podcasts, I prefer when the intro is quite short. So this is a lovely, lovely podcast all about being a counselor, being neurodivergent, exploring what is neurodivergence, what is the relationship between neurodivergence and trauma and eating disorders, what is it like to be in private practice, how can we nurture ourselves, how can we develop more self-compassion, and all of the things in between. And I have loved doing this podcast in ebbs and flows. Whenever I feel I have the energy or something curious is coming up for me or I've resonated with someone online and I just think that would be lovely to talk to them. So that's what this podcast is going to be. A wee podcast every now and again when I see someone I'm really curious about talking to that feels like a lovely presence and I ask and they say yes. So I hope you enjoy. Bye. Just begin as we're in kind of mid conversation. It feels like a nice natural place to
Mm,
begin. So we were just chatting about this feeling that can come up for us when we move out of winter and into spring, and we almost go from the volume being quite low,
mm,
or we notice that in our body that there's a heaviness. And I've seen lots of stuff online about people feeling
mm.
like they're de-thawing with the sun, like it's like they're
Yeah.
coming back to life. And what a gift that is. But at the
Mm,
same time, we can go from the volume being low to really high without that
mm.
wee transition period for our bodies and minds to catch up because we want to do
Yeah.
all the things. We've maybe had less space, less energy in the winter to do the things, and now that
Yeah.
energy's come back. How do
Mm,
we be gentle with ourselves in that transition? Which can
yeah.
be really hard with all the demands and responsibilities and things we have to do as well.
Mm, mm. Yeah. It's definitely that intensity. The sun, it's been pretty good this year. Well, here where I live, the sun, it's been really positive, good weather, and on the whole. So it's like actually, yeah, it's like feeling you need to go, 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 and actually, yeah, slowing down a little bit to avoid, yeah, running at pace towards burnout. So, yeah.
And that might come up as we go through our
Yeah.
podcast today together.
Yeah.
So, beginning with you, I wanted to share with you before I ask any questions that it's been such
Mm,
a joy to follow you online.
mm,
And I was saying as soon as we got on the call that there was a familiarity that I
mm,
had with you, even though we hadn't really chatted before. I'd been
mm,
following and really relating and connecting with a lot of what you share online.
mm,
And it feels
mm.
like such a gift that we can have that. But it's funny because then you're like, oh, I feel like I know more than I would about someone if I didn't have them online. And
Yeah.
we haven't met. But it was
Yeah.
so lovely that you decided that you wanted to come on and we could talk more about those things.
Yeah.
And I don't know this though, this first question that I shared with
Mm,
you. Where did your
mm,
experience begin and what type of therapy have you provided, maybe even not just now, but throughout
mm.
your time as a therapist? What's that looked like?
Yeah. So my history in terms as a therapist, I've been qualified as a CBT therapist for 3 years, and an EMDR therapist, relatively new now. But before that, I was a mental health nurse, for 8 years, which really informs my work as a therapist. It's very mental health nurses. I don't know how to describe it. No one really knows what they do,
Mhm.
but they do everything. And a sense of they bridge. I feel like they bridge the gap between that kind of medical model and a more humanistic kind of space. And yeah, like before that, I'd worked in mental health before that in administration. So I've sort of like gone through this weird, well, it's not that weird, it's a journey, whether it's a weird journey or not, it's subjective, but
Mhm.
just this journey of being like, I think there is a definite element of wounded healer in there. But that's shifted somewhat, I think, since I've been doing more CBT. But I went into CBT with a slightly curious, almost kind of like mischievous kind of way of actually like people like say some negative things about CBT as well as some
Yeah.
positive things. And I was working in university mental health, which I absolutely loved. And we're sort of traversing this line between mental health advisor and disability advisor. So doing stuff around equality, inclusion, diversity, and just sort of sitting this between this line of mental health and physical health, but finding, yeah, like the space of, and then I've just lost my trail of thought. But just yeah, I don't know, just that it's complicated, um, messy, and CBT is seen as this very structured, rigid, set of worksheets or tools and skills, and
Mm,
that, unfortunately, that stigma is very much perpetuated by how it's delivered in the NHS. And that's the model that has been made in the NHS before it became IAPT and talking therapies. Like it was is not so rigidly set, and actually wasn't always necessarily about it being short term. Whereas people are like, oh, CBT is this short term therapy. We go bish bash bosh, sort through your thoughts. Here's your beliefs. Off you
mm,
go. I'm a changed, reframed person. And it is much more complicated and collaborative than that, and it's
mm.
curious. But yeah, I went into it with a sense of like, I'm telling all these students, like, well, they're telling me like, oh, CBT is rubbish. And I got almost like this overarching message of, oh, CBT is rubbish, or CBT is gaslighting, or any other the terms that are thrown around, or have been thrown around. And actually I was like, do you know what? Let's go find out, shall we? Because that's how I am as a person. I'm like, if I'm starting to like have some kind of like opinion on something that I know nothing about, like like and gone and experienced, then I can't really speak about it from a place of like authority about it. But yeah, but before that, yeah, in terms of history around therapy, just mental health nursing is so holistic. My very original degree was biology. I actually probably wanted to do nutrition and dietetics and that sort of thing first. It was very much about anatomy, physiology, and then the psychological came in, and I didn't take a traditional route into psychology, and I find it really weird with this route into psychology that a lot of people take, where they do a psychology degree and then they spend 7 or 8 years being utterly flawed. Their self-esteem is completely destroyed by the process of becoming a psychologist. And actually, like, there are other ways in that you
Yeah.
can go and take other avenues, and there's other qualifications and ways to get ultimately to help people and to get them to, self-actualize, help them to
Mm,
grow, help them to change. There's so many ways you can do it, but I find it fascinating. All these, like, people going for multiple applications and rounds, and like, yeah, taking the assistant psychologist jobs, like voluntary work and all sorts of things. I'm going, I
mm.
don't know if I just bypassed that route,
Yeah.
but I never intended to end up here. It was never like a massive life goal to become a therapist.
Mm,
I never knew what I wanted to do when I was younger. I just followed the path of, and it probably is the path of intuition. Um, you start with that whole, when you're at school, when they tell you, I'll pick something you enjoy and you love doing if you don't know what else to do. So yeah, okay, I'll go biology. Um,
mm,
Ended up in teaching, which was an appalling fit for me.
mm.
But yeah, yeah, and then eventually into mental health, doing administrative work. And then going, do you know what? I want to go and give this a try. And I just remember one of the mental health nurses at the time going, don't do it. Don't do it. I was like, no, I'm going to go and do it. I'm going to go find out for myself.
Felt
So
it.
for me, it's about a
Ah,
curiosity about
yeah.
peoples and systems and context, and there is no one right way of doing things ultimately.
Oh my
Different
goodness,
paths.
where to reflect on all of that. That's so amazing.
You got a long answer.
But it was so detailed and really relatable in so many ways. And like you said,
Mm,
the ability to follow our curiosity and acknowledge we have choice, and everything is so interconnected. I think we sometimes see things in silos. I sadly think that that assumption that you described of students coming in and
Mm,
saying CBT is a certain way, sadly, counselors have that assumption
mm,
that are in different
mm,
modalities. There's so many things we could learn from each other and bring together. I even said there's some routes or paths that we have crossovers on, yoga,
mm. Yeah,
nutrition,
yeah,
dietetics, sport, nutrition. I was
yeah.
so interested in the body and took it to an extreme, sadly, because I am similar in the way that I go all in on things and I learn
Mm,
everything about things and I see how they're all interconnected.
mm.
What a gift, though, that psychotherapy and counseling has now become a special interest because there's always things to learn and grow and develop, and it's so unique for each one person, but it also feels in that never-ending pursuit, it doesn't feel harmful. Whereas I think some subjects for me,
Mm,
nutrition, body, exercise, all that kind of stuff, the extremes or learning so much can sometimes have a negative. So I've yet to
yeah.
find following my curiosity in this field harmful. I've
Mm,
actually only found it more
mm,
expansive, more allowing me to see all the cross intersections, like you
mm,
mentioned in mental health nursing. It's such a you wear all the hats. It's so interconnected. You're doing so many different things. And then I'm wondering how that kind of transformed into you exploring CBT and EMDR because there's something
mm,
in there about the cognitive and the
mm.
somatic processing, that
Yeah,
mind-body connection.
yeah.
And I don't have a lot of experience in CBT,
Mm,
but I do have an open-mindedness, and I'm really curious to hear
mm,
more about your journey in that space and also combining different
mm.
experiences together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so CBT, like I did my training with King's as well, so it's like the most like the original like CBT training course. So it's probably about as rigid as you can get in terms. I know there's sort of standardized in terms of like the marking and what have you, but just this kind of the psychiatric aspect in there is intertwined with psychology and CBT. So some of the training I found quite just diagnostic, very diagnostic, fitting into this box and treating this client as this kind of otherworldly, there's a human here at the end of this process. But the cognitive is important because it got me to think about, you know, the crap we tell ourselves in our brains, the narratives, the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs, which then comes up in EMDR, because there is a crossover in EMDR with some cognitive stuff there. So even EMDR is not as pure somatic like as it could be. It does intertwine the two because like in CBT, sorry, not CBT, in EMDR, you go, you are connecting that person to their process, to their body with the bilateral stimulation, whether it's the eye movements or tapping. You're getting them to connect with themselves physically, but you're also having to cultivate this sense of like self-trust as part of the process that their experience is valid and I'm not this all-seeing, guru of like expertise and actually then there's a like the list of beliefs under different domains that are used in EMDR which are in CBT as well, safety vulnerability. I've got my list here just by accident. Safety, vulnerability, I can't trust anyone, I can't, I'm in danger, I'm not safe. Control and choices, feelings of powerlessness or weaknesses, or not in control. Responsibility, something I've done wrong, something internal, and that kind of defectiveness aspect of like, I am wrong, I've done, I'm, and you do actually do a occasional thought challenging, sorry,
Mhm.
restructuring. You can't call it challenging. They
Mhm.
they said in our training you call it evaluating. But
Mhm.
yeah, there is a little bit in it in the EMDR.
Wow.
Yeah, I just find with EMDR you just get to the nub of things quicker if the person is open and receptive to the process of EMDR, which can be the challenge. There can be a blockage or resistance of almost like, okay, so now I own this process and you just we don't just talk about stuff, and I intellectualize, stuff here. And we keep talking about the same thing, and actually that can be avoidance of actually feeling what's underneath. So that's what I really like about EMDR is that, a lot of the sessions I won't be saying much, or I'll obviously be doing by observing the person, but they're going through their own process and they're having to actually confront and feel their feelings, which is where, from a cognitive CBT point, isn't always there, um, and can be slower. I mean, as I say, I still think from CBT it has its absolute merits, and I still very much use it. It's like almost like there's a foundation, as you
Yeah.
say, of the different modalities. There isn't one size fits all approach, but there is definitely a trend or a pattern of people struggling to confront and feel their feelings.
Yes. And that can develop over time and for so many different reasons. In some ways, the patterns of society kind of
Mm,
put us more into that cognitive
mm,
intellectualizing space. So there
mm,
isn't that real kind of encouragement of nurturing spaces to feel, to work out,
mm,
not even to work out. That's an interesting thing that I just
mm,
shared there of like to work out how we
mm,
feel. It's actually just to be with the feelings.
mm,
And that list that you mentioned there, have you
mm.
noticed some of those patterns in your work? Because as I was exploring some of your work, you've identified
Mm.
some major groups of people that you tend to work with.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my sort of niche is like eating disorders, and but it's very much that trauma component of eating disorders for me. Yes, there's a neurodiversity element in there as well, but as I'm evolving, I realise I can see it's moving down a more complex trauma. Unpicking the layers of the onion or whatever metaphor you want to use, and what is neurodivergence and what is trauma. That's the big overarching
So
question.
huge.
And then people not liking when you throw that in there, and the curiosity of absolutely, it's absolutely all genetic and biological, and it's like, well, show me what the what that gene is or whatever. Like I'm always critical. So,
Mm.
whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm always open and like let's look at things from all angles. But anyway, yeah, in terms of the self-defectiveness, very much, particularly in eating issues, very much is this entrenched kind of like, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve love. I'm a bad person. I deserve only bad things, and then that has come from obviously earlier experiences, um, and a sense of, yeah, that tends to be more, I think, with the eating issues, um, and that kind of I should have done something or I'm doing something wrong aspect. Um, I see the other ones, control and choices, happen more with stuff like in terms of OCD, more so, and
Mm.
other kind of like more social anxiety, or yeah. It's just interesting where they pop up. I'm still,
Yeah.
as I'm going through this process, it's interesting the different presentations, how they line up with different
Yeah.
beliefs. But I literally, I'm going to laminate. Obviously, in terms of this list, you can freely get it on the internet of like
Oh,
examples of negative and positive cognitions. But I use it in everything, and because some people really struggle to articulate, even with a cognitive cycle, I'm like, right, here you go. Here's the list. Which one are these?
lovely.
And 9 times out of 10, they go, yeah, it's that one or these ones. They can tell you straight away when you show them that list which ones they are, which cuts
Mm.
down. Also, like in terms of it just helps us. Yeah, there is obviously absolute process in the exploration, but generally underneath there is a sense of like, well, if you show me that list, they'll know what it is.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it's just whether they're willing to confront it and
That's
challenge it and
yeah.
change it.
All of that. And like you said, to name it really focuses in on the work. And I mentioned to you some of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'm wondering on that point how you have seen or your experience with clients and your own knowledge and experience, how you've seen eating disorders overlap with complex trauma. What would you describe
Mm.
that relationship to be?
I do relate it to my own lived experience in the journey, of just like yeah, it is, it isn't just about eating. I never just say, oh, it's not about eating at all. There is some element there is about eating as well. Obviously, it's complicated. That's the point. People have a complex range of origins for an eating disorder, usually some, historical childhood stuff, and then it's sort of peppered with experiences that confirm beliefs to a kind of trigger event. The average onset is 15, 16, and that's like in all the literature is like age 15, 16 is the point that it gets triggered. Mine was that too, because it's a point where you are transitioning in your life and starting, that traverse that line of adulthood. So yeah, it's really interesting. I had a very specific trigger incident at 15, but it was all layered and undercurrent of like beliefs being peppered and formed over the course of childhood experience. So then it will, and also, like our culture is disordered around eating. Whether you want to call it diet culture, that's just one layer of it. It's multi-layered, and that's where the trauma kind of aspect kind of comes in. That's why traversing that line of complex trauma, where someone with disordered eating, if you and we're talking not intertwined with more the complex sort of side of things, is that in eating disorder treatment, in NHS eating disorder treatment, the first steps is eating 3 meals and 1 to 3 snacks, and you start that process. It's very behavioural, and you do that over a period of however long the person needs. It's usually interspersed with people really obviously struggling with the idea of doing it perfectly, and it's like, no, it's not about doing perfectly. It's just about doing, good enough, and it, just takes time. What I tend to find is if it's more just less severe and it's on a milder end, people are like, right, I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't actually eating enough. And now I eat three kind of balanced meals, 1 to 3 snacks. I don't restrict myself, and I no longer have binges. But for people like myself, and other people I come across, it's like, okay, I've done all that, but I'm still binging. So what's going on? Or I'm still
Oh gosh.
restricting. Um, and then that's the complex for me. That's that layer of complex trauma aspect of like, okay, is it just emotional eating, or is it meeting other, some people just be like, oh, it's emotional eating, it's stress eating. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's about about regulating yourself in the moment. It's used as a coping
Yeah.
tool. It can be used from an ADHD standpoint as this kind of, I suppose, novelty, reaching out for novelty, dopamine hit. I know my experience has been both of those. Sometimes I'm really bored by my environment, and I have no novelty, so give me that chocolate.
Yeah.
And other times it's like, I'm really struggling with this emotion, so let me go reach for whatever the kind of trigger food is, to help me regulate myself as well. There's a real mixture um, that goes on, and it's an individual. I always think of it like an email signature. No, no, a real life signature. Just everyone's signature is different.
Yes. Well, that's a lovely way to frame it. Because, like you said, there is a lot of, sadly, assumptions when it comes to eating disorders. I have a complex relationship with the idea of it being an addiction, but actually seeing
Mm,
it through that lens has been really helpful in terms of a biopsychosocial experience
mm,
and really honoring the complexities of that signature. Because sadly, when we say eating disorder, a lot of it is focused on food and our relationship with
mm,
our body. And like you said, 3 square meals a day, two
mm.
snacks, that should be
Yeah,
fine then, right? Because we
yeah,
approach it with the behavior rather than
yeah.
recognizing all of the undercurrents of the bio, that part of it would be the neurotransmitters, the dopamine, the
Mm,
biology impact of food.
mm,
And then you've got
mm,
the psychological. So if that's our thoughts about our body, if that's our thoughts about food, if that's needing a
mm.
sense of control and certainty, and
Yeah, it's
actually
very much.
ordering your food can kind of bring
Yeah,
that certainty, right? But
yeah.
then
It helps you feel calm.
it helps you feel calm and it regulates
Mm,
your body, like you mentioned. And then that
mm,
social dynamic of
mm.
what's the culture? What is the culture telling us about our relationship
Mm.
with food and our body and
Yeah.
exercise? And then we've went from real, well, who knows how to actually articulate the
Mm.
trends of exercise in our body. But about
Mm.
5 years ago, it moved from a kind of diet culture to a wellness culture. And that was
Mm.
kind of I heard it described as diet culture is no, wait. Wellness culture is diet culture in sheep's clothing. So it's
Mm,
just a remodel of the same thing, the same outcomes of be smaller, control your food,
mm,
control your body, and that equals your worth. So
yeah.
there's so many different things because it's wrapped up in worth and control and pain
Mm,
and regulation. And like you said, it's historical, but it's actually in the moment regulation too. So
yeah.
there's and the side effects of withdrawal and
Mm,
kind of food noise and all these kind of
yeah.
things are wrapped up. So I guess I wanted to share all of those strands and
Mm,
underline what you said because I think sometimes when people say eating disorders, they don't recognize all the complexities, and it's sometimes hard to go into all the complexities, but unless you
yeah.
know of someone who's went through that experience or you have been through that experience yourself, that's when you really get the complexities of it and all the
Mm,
assumptions kind of they fizz away. But sadly, it
yeah.
comes back to that CBT approach sometimes in the
Sometimes, yeah.
NHS. The NHS and the way that they've approached eating disorder recovery, I think, kind of, and sadly, in the resources and all these kind of things, it limits what we view as recovery too. I don't know if that's the same
It's
thought that you
like
have, but
my
yeah.
my experience of working in NHS eating disorder service, like I'm very like I've had to come to terms with that as a really difficult experience in terms of very well-meaning people and but completely like to be fair, like my experience was really set in an institutional experience. Cambridge is very perfectionistic, very sort of high, like sort of demand and this kind of rigidity to it, and it was quite medical, because of the physical health risks with particularly with anorexia and bulimia. That there was a real sense of like scaredness and risk averse, and to try something different for fear of blame and but at the same time missing that individual kind of experience wrapped up in that medical way of treating an eating disorder of like and really dehumanizing the human experience of like always the eating disorder voice. I'm like, what the hell is the eating disorder voice? Like, oh, that's just your ED voice talking to you, and you should ignore it. Or I don't know, but just like yeah, quite rigid, and it was a very difficult experience my time working for them, because I worked with some amazing people, and we all left at the same time. But there we were all trying to like go, look, you need to be more neurodiversity affirming here. You're not recognizing this person might have ADHD or autism. You're not recognizing that like there's underneath the ambivalence, you've got to explore that ambivalence rather than just being like, oh, they're not ready to change, or like it was like there's a scaredness around changing. You need to explore that and that barrier. And it's not the right time for them. They'll need to come back when they're ready, and kind of putting them through this rigmarole of like, and basically you get very similar, rigid, perfectionistic in the team, in the
Right.
dynamics, as
Whoa.
well as the clients, the transference that you get. It's very I did not leave in a great great way, but I stood up for my clients, and that's what I'm most proud of about working there. There was some quite stigmatizing and very derogatory language towards clients with personality, whatever you want to call it, disorder issues. Again, I always look under that as a lens of complex trauma, and it's like actually they're not being suicidal for the fun of it here. I'm not, sorry, that was very
Yeah,
kind of glib like what
I
that's
hear
not what
you.
they're saying at all, but just kind of like this is a behavior and they're doing it to manipulate or attention seek, and I very much stood up for that very firmly before I left. And then I left. So, yeah, yeah. But in short, the NHSED service model, there is lots of entrenched disorderedness within the working culture that transfers to the client, and vice versa. So you've got to have really good
Oh,
support systems in
sure.
place, but also compassion. So, you
Compassion.
know, very much.
Compassion has to be woven in and
Mm,
nurtured. And like you said, we carry all our stuff with us in any job that we do, and we're
mm,
all informed by the culture. So
yeah,
we carry our own unique experiences that impact how we show up in all these roles, but we're also informed by the culture. And so that sadly impacts the models that we use for recovery.
yeah.
And
There's
a
no
couple,
perfect
yeah.
model. There's no
Yeah,
perfect model,
exactly. There's not. At
ultimately.
different times in our life, we might draw from different things
Mm,
and resonate with different things and come back to things. I've often realized that some of the things that I was learning about 5 years ago or things that I wanted to bring into my life, I need reminded of because they slip away. And that was
mm,
a wee question before I asked you more about neurodivergence. A wee question I had for you is that in a world where we are bombarded with messages about wellness in our
mm,
body and all these kind of things,
mm.
how do you navigate that in terms of sharing that with clients or even yourself of looking after yourself through a seasonal lens too? You mentioned that before we even began. Like
Yeah,
how do you
it
look
is
after
that. Yeah, in terms of that, it's for me now I'm transitioning. I'm now what 18 months into private practice, 1 full year of full-time private practice. And for me, it has been that overarching question of how do I look after myself to make sure I give the best to my clients without sacrificing kind of myself, because I think there can be a very much, again, culture-driven, people-pleasing, overextending of self, meeting demand kind of aspect that comes into the work. So it's like, well, how do you manage that self-care? And I don't always get it right. This week has probably been a good example of that. But other times it's again it's about I thinking making sure that there are clients that are a good fit for you, and really refining that, and really actually learning to undo your own people-pleasing conditioning
Mm,
in the process. I feel I'm now traversing that line of like boundaries. Yeah, but what does that actually really mean? It's not just about putting in a boundary, it's about having really hard conversations with people, but doing it as early as possible. That for me is
mm,
the self-care of like
mm,
you can't mitigate what will happen later on down the line, but there's something at the entry point when a client comes to see you of actually going, do you know what? Are we gonna fit a mesh together? I tend to find client, where not that it feels effortless, because there is still an effort, but it feels it feels warmer, it feels
yes.
easier, it feels lighter, and you feel even on the sessions of like that have been really emotionally challenging, you come out of it with a sense of like something's changed or different in the relationship. So I've
Yeah.
got that's the work I'm traversing, because for me that is the point in terms of self-care. It's being able to actually trust, you know what, I need a break now, or oh, but very tangible, practical things I put in as I make sure I have a week off every 6 weeks, every 6 to 7 weeks. That's been one of the main ones. Scheduling from a neurodiversity aspect as well for me, really scheduling clients when my energy is best and not putting clients in places where my brain isn't working properly. So evenings,
Yes.
for example, are
Yes.
not. I know people want evenings, and it's like, well, my brain doesn't work, so no. Basically, you're not going to get the best session. Do a Saturday though, and that's fine with me. That works for me, and I take a day off on another day. And I can still offer that availability.
Mm.
Lots of like the basic stuff, with sleeping and eating. I've also had I had a diagnosis of sleep apnea before Christmas, so I have actually been walking around like a zombie for years and not really actually known. So I'm amazed I've actually been able to do this work whilst having obstructive sleep apnea. So I'm just like so now that I'm actually getting treated for it and now everything is working as it should be, it should be
Mm.
interesting to see what that does to the self-care as well.
Huge.
But navigating, health conditions, the unknown and the known health conditions, doing this work is that managing those energy spoons, basically. It's like, yeah, yeah.
So much, so much. It's such a good frame to think about and how that ebbs and flows with us. And like you said, the known and the unknown impacts of all these things. And I think the more
Mm,
I've understood my own experience of neurodivergence and almost what I've felt in the last 5 years is I've been able to turn the empathy, the compassion, and the understanding I've had for everyone in my life inward. And it's
yeah.
had such a transformational effect on the way that I show up personally and professionally. But professionally, it's such a difference. Working for
Mm,
myself and being able to have some autonomy and agency over my own
mm,
schedule, like you said, to plan the day for what works best for me, even that one
mm,
thing has such a significant effect. And then like when do I do admin? When I
Yeah.
have the energy for that. And I only do it rather than this kind of throughout the whole
Mm.
day kind of thing. Sometimes it happens that way and I'm doing emails when I probably,
Yeah.
if I thought about it, I wouldn't be doing it. But I
Yeah.
have so much more freedom and choice and like you said, that match part. And I realized in my early years that I thought I didn't realize. I said I could work with
Mm.
anyone. I could meet anyone where they're at and just kind of
Mm.
camouflage or chameleonize myself to meet with anyone. And
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
like,
can, I can do that. But
mm.
the impact on me is really
Mm.
negative because I
Yeah.
overextend myself. I lean in
Yeah.
further and I'm using all those kind of emotional, almost like the mirror neurons of empathy are like on high
Mm.
volume trying to connect. Whereas
Yeah.
I've realized over time, naturally, I've developed a niche. I never realized I wanted a niche actually because
Mm.
I am a very passionate person about lots of different things, and I get really excited about lots of different
Mm.
aspects of well-being, psychotherapy. All these themes really interest me. So I always kind of said I wouldn't really niche down because I feel like that would be limiting my
Mm.
capacity. But actually, I've naturally developed a niche without me even
Mm.
trying. The type
Mm.
of people I'm attracted to or are attracted to working with me, that kind of
Yeah.
gel experience that you said, where there's ease in amongst the pain, in
Yeah.
amongst the drain, there's
Yeah.
ease. And that's
Yeah.
just kind of happened quite naturally. And that's taken me on
Oh.
a whole path of neurodivergence. And
Mm.
yeah, that takes me to that question that I have for you around neurodivergence. You mentioned earlier the more you lean into trauma and exploration in
Mm.
that space, the more you're kind of going, is this trauma, is this neurodivergence?
Mm.
What is your thoughts on the ever evolving movement of
Mm.
neurodivergence, especially in counseling and even when I say that word,
Mm.
what comes up?
Yeah, just like it's been 5 years of like very, very quick culture change. Can I say 5 years? Because it might have been slightly longer than that, but my experience in university mental health and that was it really ramped up COVID. I mean, I got my diagnosis of ADHD like a week before lockdown, so so it's just like, but since that time, it has like the whole move. It's a movement. It's a community. It's a culture now. The word has been taken and people have made their own meaning and that's there's been I definitely pushback in the media over the last 2 or 3 weeks
Mhm.
about it. Loads of people getting this and actually is it even real then? Are people overdoing diagnosis and stuff and which is also just really interesting that kind of coming in of that challenge around it. But ultimately it's about people finding their own acceptance in the world where whatever that looks like and actually like accept me as I am, all my whatever my quirks are, like whatever I sort of present with, and actually this is how I like to do things, whether you call that autistic, ADHD, like that. I definitely feel like for me there's a profile in terms of neurodivergence, and I know I sit within that of this highly whether you want to call it highly sensitive, empathic, sense of injustice, justice sensitive, the sensitivity to the right, wrong morality in the world. There's definitely a strong sense of that, being sensitive to what's going on and having to withdraw from environments. And then my current thinking this week has just been like, the world has become so overloaded with information. We're now pushing back against this artificial world that we've created. So the neurodivergence, but there are definitely, obviously, again, it's a diagnostic model thing. It's like, obviously, there are criteria, and again,
Mhm.
they have been male centric as well. But yeah, like if yeah, I have lots of questions, but that doesn't mean I don't believe in it. And I think sometimes I worry about saying something that is like, oh, what could be trauma, and then being seen as like I'm not affirming, and I am definitely affirming
That's
of it.
absolutely.
But like, I just don't know. Like we can be
Mm.
curious and again question about what is and isn't real. I can tell you I'm a highly sensitive human empath. I feel things very deeply. Generationally, I've seen this. My dad very much, this hugely empathic man that would mask and, camouflage his way through the world, rather than exist and be in that authentic self, because ultimately then you'll probably get rejected for that.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's so important. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I resonate so deeply, and I've talked to people close to me about
Mm,
how do we remain curious whilst also acknowledging we really value and identify with the whole movement of neurodivergence and still acknowledge I'm so curious and I have so many questions and I would love tons of research on
mm,
trauma, inequality, neurodivergence, and specific, maybe new neurodivergencies that will come out from
mm,
understanding different experiences of women. And like, there's just so many more questions I
mm.
have.
Yeah,
But at the same time, really value the movement and what's changing and
yeah,
what's being acknowledged. And those things can coexist. The two things
yes,
can be true at the same time, that
yeah,
there's so much
yeah,
value and so much affirming, whilst also
mm,
acknowledging there's an excitement actually. It's not a shutdown or a
mm,
that's not true. It's more an expansive, what more can we learn? How can we add
yeah,
to this new understanding in the movement and better understand ourselves and
mm,
others and develop more compassion and because
yeah,
it's such a difference with this understanding. And I think this curiosity is part of the neurodivergence expression, of like,
yeah.
I want to learn more, I want to understand
I
more.
want to
Like,
know more.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. So it's such a gift, and I'm glad that there is more of that encouragement of
mm,
questions.
yeah,
It feels really, really important.
mm, mm,
And on that, I wanted to ask you a wee question. I've got a wee list of things.
mm,
I think we've covered the
yeah,
first few.
mm,
So, how does neurodivergence come up in the counseling room for you? How do you create space for adaptations or conversations around neurodivergence?
mm. So that from that almost that first intro call, I'm just like, asking questions about any adjustments you need. But a lot of the time, people don't know what adjustments they need because they've never really been asked before. Some people do, but some people don't. So it's asking like, but giving them some ideas of what that could be. Like if you need to get up and move around, you don't have to stay still or sit in the chair the entire time. Or do we need to occasionally turn the screen off, or do we need to take a couple of minutes break? Would be useful to get stuff written down in session, and then you take notes away afterwards, so it helps you remember what we've done in the session. It's stuff like that. It's very much more practical, but then also asking, I always ask, like whoever you are, is nailing that question, those questions from the first session is, what are your expectations of therapy? What are your expectations of me as a therapist? What are my expectations of you in this process? And that uncovers a lot. Because then I just think, yeah, that early conversation helps with that match. Because I think from a neurodivergence, can be a really strong inner critic, and sort of quite high perfectionistic standards of self and others in the picture as well. So it's just about naming everything early and asking as
Mm.
many questions earlier in the process as possible, so you know that you're, similarly aligned, but also being open to how to make this process work for you.
Yes. I have a wee follow-up question, but I'm
Mm,
wondering off the back of that, how is your energy? How are you feeling?
mm. Tired.
Okay.
Tired, very tired this week, and cruising towards a break.
Hmm.
In the next, obviously Easter coming up soon, but yeah, energy is yeah, it's nice to be asked that question. So from that perfectionistic aspect of like, yeah, just showing up that actually sometimes my energy is ebbing and flowing, and this
Yeah.
week has been particularly challenging for my energy. And I'm moving into a new office over the next few days as well. So just getting that to land as well, and hopefully that it's a good fit. But yeah, energy. I am drained
Mm.
this week, and but yeah, that comes with a sense of like, okay, where can I dial back over the next few
Yeah.
days and start thinking about that.
It's so important. And then once we know that, like you said, we can work out what are the non-negotiables of the week or the day.
Mm,
And then what things, because with perfectionism, if we've, well, the way
mm,
that I understand it in my experience is
mm,
if I have a plan and there's that wee niggling perfectionism that comes
yeah.
in, I kind of try and meet the plan of the day. And I think that
Mm,
now I'm beginning to offer myself that space of like, okay, this is a plan. But
yeah.
if I'm feeling a sort of way when I wake up or as the day goes on, how can I kind
Mm,
of bring back the plan a wee bit? And that sadly, or not so sadly, there is things that people will have to just do. in the
Yeah,
responsibilities of life and
yeah.
the way that society's set up and all those things. But there are
Mm,
things that we can leave till tomorrow and that's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, like tonight I was going to go out. I'm not going to go out. It's as simple as that. It's going, no, not quite up to that. Need to dial my energy back. It's okay. I haven't been able to go to the gym for a bit because I've had this injury. But okay,
Mm,
maybe tomorrow morning I'll go and do something before start looking at the office and what needs to happen. So,
yes, that's it.
mm,
And yeah, I wanted to ask you a wee bit about something you mentioned there around the inner critic. So, how have you
mm,
seen the inner critic show up in the different people that you've worked with, or anything that comes up around that?
definitely. When I say inner critic, it comes from more of a schema therapy of the unrelenting standards. High expectations of the self and then of others with that. So that inner critic can be really strong. Um, yeah, definitely in my clients, it comes up for myself as well because I know my own schema. So it comes back to that sense of like in terms of ma energy management around that inner critic. And again, the antidote to the critic is the compassion and learning how to actually be compassionate towards yourself because, like, it's not one and done, is it? It's
Yes.
a constant evolution of like practicing that muscle of compassion towards well, the client. That's easy enough. I can totally be compassionate towards them, but it's affording that to myself as well.
Mm. So that's something that you work on a lot with
Yeah,
people, that nurturing that self-compassion.
yeah, very much. Because that's ultimately for me that's the main way of getting that bringing dialing that critical voice down, but the messy part is that middle part of well, how do I do this, how do I get there? Okay, we've got to practice. Okay, what would you say? And you've got to it is like any training, you've got to keep practicing it, and again, awareness of thought before
Mm.
you can even start to go, actually let's apply a compassionate lens to this.
Yes. Yeah, because like you said, a lot of those automatic thoughts can be quite critical and
Mm,
pushing ourselves down or having really high expectations of ourselves. So
mm,
sometimes I think about it as having to resist some of the culture, like actually
mm.
having to
Yeah,
actively resist
yeah.
what's out there and work out what
Yeah,
we feel and what we want for ourselves.
yeah, definitely. It's that not outsourcing yourself. Yeah, it's the self-trust and
Yes.
actually removing, the perfection from society and the critic, the strong critic of society. It means you do have to actively rebel against it.
Yeah.
And then that can be quite isolating and lonely in the process until you find your tribe who also feel the same.
Yes. And I guess that's a nice place where we can think about coming to an
Mm.
end.
Mm,
Who has influenced that part of you, or where have you went to find more of a tribe, or yeah, have you
mm,
went through that process yourself of exploring and finding people you resonate with and that don't bring
mm,
up that inner critic as much
mm.
or heighten self-compassion?
Definitely think it's more in a spiritual space. Definitely more, getting involved for me with things like women's circles and, leaning into that kind of intuitive
Mm.
sort of nature. I did 2 years ago, I did a women's retreat in Costa Rica. And I was like with 40 other women, and we were all pretty much like, it was amazing to be. It was literally my tribe of people, all very deep feeling, intuitive women, all kind of interested, in the spiritual and the woo, whilst also simultaneously being like a pilot or a financial advisor or,
Mm.
or doing like quite, cognitive kind of jobs, but equally finding the space together where we could all be in our somatic kind of empathic uh, kind of space or authentically with each other. So that has really informed my experience about tribe beyond that point. Like of actually like who makes me feel good and spending more time with those people that I just make, when I have a sigh of relief with them again, is feeling at ease. If I feel at
Yeah.
ease with someone, then I move towards them. And and I'm not saying if you rub me up the wrong way completely that I won't go anywhere near you, because that's polarizing as well. But it's just like the feeling that you get with someone. It's like, actually, yeah, I
Mhm.
want to spend more time with them because they get me. Or yeah,
Yeah.
definitely more spiritual space. Tend to be other therapists, obviously, as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, not always, but yeah.
That's it. Not always. It's hard to sometimes summarize where we get that nurturing, but I really resonate with that. Some of the yoga retreats that I've been on, predominantly women, has really challenged that wound that I've had in the past around leaning into female relationships in that way. I used to
Mm,
specifically gravitate more to the male energy for the lightness, for the
mm,
sense of not being judged,
mm,
for lots of
mm,
different things. And but I had some close female friends, but the idea of it being in a group form, I mean, I've
mm,
got a strange relationship with groups anyway. So
mm.
yoga retreats and women's circles have really challenged that part of me and
Yeah.
allowed me to feel safe and trusting and being held. You know, the amount of times
Mm,
that I've been in sharing circles and then we went into, say, a yoga practice and I fell asleep in the shavasana. And that's when I
mm.
know I'm fully at rest. I'm not alert. I'm not hypervigilant. I'm not kind of
Yeah.
aware of what's going on. My whole body is
Mm,
resting. Like that
yeah.
sounds small, but it was so significant to me to feel safe and at ease and
Mm,
at home in that. And it's made me long for that more in my life. And as I've came more into private practice and kind of that solo
mm.
experience or
Yeah.
holding others,
Yeah.
I've thought, how can I bring more of that into my life, that physical holding too? Because online
Yeah.
it really is deeply connecting, but at the same time acknowledging I need that kind of in-person holding. And that
Yeah.
comes for me in that yoga
Receiving
space, receiving,
thing.
receiving. That's it. Allowing,
Receiving.
yeah, allowing that receiving in.
Mm, yeah, very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you so much. This has been
Thank
so
you.
interesting
Oh,
and so many
yeah.
things come up.
Yeah. It's been really, really helpful for me. So it's been really lovely this
I'm going
conversation.
to